The winter sun was soft that morning, spilling golden light over the busy market street. The air carried the smell of roasted peanuts and fresh flowers. Vendors called out their prices. Children ran between stalls, and somewhere in the middle of all the noise, a sound began to rise, a slow, aching melody from a worn-out violin. Narendra Modi was walking beside his mother, Hiraba Modi, holding her hand gently as they made their way to a small temple nearby. His security detail followed at a respectful distance, careful not to disturb her pace. Despite the noise of the street, Hiraba slowed her steps, her head turned, her eyes searching, her ears catching each trembling note. There, on the corner of the road, sat an old man with a hunched back. His clothes were faded, his hands rough and trembling, but his fingers moved over the strings with the grace of someone who had lived his entire life in music. Beside him was a small tin box, holding only a few coins and a folded photograph. Hiraba stopped walking. Modi noticed the sudden halt and looked at her. She didn't speak, she just tightened her grip on his hand and nodded toward the musician. Modi understood. He stepped closer with her, the crowd parting quietly as they recognized him. People expected Modi to speak to the market vendors or shake hands, but instead, he simply stood beside his mother, listening. The music had no words, yet it spoke of loss, hope, and years that could not be reclaimed. The man's eyes stayed closed as he played, unaware that the Prime Minister of India was standing only a few feet away. Modi felt something shift in the air. The crowd's chatter faded, the security detail lowered their voices, and for a moment, it was as if the whole market had paused to listen. Hiraba's eyes softened as she stepped forward. She bent down slightly, as much as her age allowed, and placed her own worn hand on the old man's shoulder. He stopped playing, startled. His eyes opened slowly, and when he saw her face, he smiled, faintly, as if recognizing a kindness he had long forgotten. "Please, continue," she said in a voice so gentle that even the security guards leaned in to hear. The man hesitated. "Ma, my music is for the streets now. It has no place before important people." Hiraba shook her head. "Music always has a place where hearts can hear it." The crowd murmured in agreement. Modi, still silent, watched his mother closely. He knew she had a way of seeing what others overlooked, and he could see that this moment was not about politics or image. It was about something much older and deeper. The old man raised the violin again, but this time he played with more strength. The melody grew warmer, as if the sudden attention had poured life back into his hands. Hiraba listened without moving, and Modi found himself drawn into the music too, feeling it echo in the quiet spaces of his own heart. Then Modi noticed something. The folded photograph lying in the tin box was not of the old man alone. It was of a younger version of him standing proudly beside a girl holding the same violin. Her smile was bright, her eyes full of life. But the picture was faded and cracked, and something about it hinted at a story that was not happy. Before Modi could ask, Hiraba reached into her small cloth bag. She pulled out a carefully folded shawl, warm and hand-woven. She placed it over the old man's shoulders. "The mornings are cold," she said softly. The old man's lips trembled. "My daughter used to cover me with her own scarf," he whispered, glancing at the photograph. "But she is gone now." The words hung in the air. Even the wind seemed to still. Modi saw the pain in the man's eyes, and he knew this meeting was not by chance. His mother had stopped because her heart had recognized another heart in need, and somewhere deep inside, Modi felt the first stirrings of a decision forming, one that would change not only this man's life, but also his own. The crowd lingered around the corner of the market, unwilling to move on. Some took out their phones to record the moment, but most simply watched in silence, sensing something rare was happening. The old man, still wrapped in the warm shawl Hiraba had given him, lowered his violin. His eyes stayed on the folded photograph in the tin box, as if it was the only thing keeping him connected to the world. Modi stepped forward and knelt beside the man so they were at the same level. He didn't speak right away. He simply reached toward the tin box and picked up the photograph with care, as though it might fall apart in his hands. "She is your daughter?" Modi asked, gently. The old man nodded. Her name was Mira. His voice cracked as he spoke. "She played the violin better than I ever could. She dreamed of joining the city orchestra. But dreams, they cost more than we could pay." Hiraba leaned forward, listening intently. "What happened to her?" The old man took a deep breath. 3 years ago, she left home to perform at a music festival. She promised she would return by the next week, but the bus she traveled in, it never reached the city." A sharp silence filled the space between his words. The sound of a metal pot clanging in a faraway stall seemed too loud. "There was an accident?" Modi asked quietly. The man nodded, his eyes fixed on the ground. "Many did not survive. She was among them." His hand trembled as he touched the edge of the shawl. "Since that day, I have played here, because this was where I first taught her music, and maybe—" his voice faded, "maybe she can still hear me." Hiraba's eyes glistened, but she did not cry. Instead, she reached out and placed her hand over the man's. "You still play for her. That is love." The man gave a weak smile. "But love does not fill the stomach. Ma, my wife is gone too. I have no family now. Music is the only thing left." The crowd shifted uneasily. Even strangers could feel the weight of his loneliness. Modi felt something twist inside him. He had seen poverty, loss, and struggle across the country. But there was something deeply personal about this man's story. Maybe it was because he could see how easily it could have been anyone, how fate could change a life in one sudden turn. As they spoke, a young boy about 10 years old stepped forward from the back of the crowd. His clothes were dusty, his hair messy, and in his small hands he carried a broken plastic flute. He looked up at the old man shyly. "Can you teach me?" he asked. The man blinked, surprised. "Teach you?" "Yes," the boy said, clutching the flute tightly. "I have no money, but I want to play music like you." Hiraba smiled faintly, watching the exchange. "It seems your daughter's gift still lives," she said softly. But Modi was already thinking further. He could see the way the old man's face lit up, just for a moment, at the thought of teaching again. And in that moment, Modi realized that the man didn't just need charity, he needed purpose. Modi stood and looked around at the crowd. This man's music is not just his own, it belongs to everyone who listens. And today, it belongs to India. The market went quiet, hanging on his words. "We will not let his music be lost," Modi continued, his voice steady. "Not while there are still hearts that can hear it." The old man stared at him in disbelief. Hiraba simply nodded, as if she had already known her son would say this. But in the back of the crowd, an unfamiliar face was watching closely. A man in a black coat, his eyes sharp, as if he knew something about the violin players past that no one else here did, and whatever it was, it would soon bring trouble. The crowd began to disperse slowly, but the memory of the music still hung in the air. Some people dropped coins into the old man's tin box before leaving. Others offered him words of blessing. The young boy with the broken flute stayed close, as if afraid the chance to learn would slip away if he let go of the moment. Hiraba adjusted her shawl, ready to continue toward the temple, but Modi lingered. He could not ignore the feeling that this was not yet over. His eyes kept moving through the crowd, searching without knowing exactly why. Then he saw him. Standing near a closed spice stall was a tall man in a long black coat, his face half hidden by the shadow of his cap. He wasn't browsing the market, or speaking to anyone. He was simply watching, his gaze fixed on the old violin player. The man's eyes were sharp, unblinking. He did not seem moved by the music or touched by the story. Instead, his expression carried something else, something heavier, almost like accusation. Modi's instincts told him this was important. Years in public life had taught him to notice the smallest details. And this man's presence was not by accident. The black-coated stranger finally stepped forward. The crowd parted just enough for him to pass. He stopped directly in front of the old violinist and looked down at him without a smile. "You still play?" the man said. His voice was low, carrying a hint of disbelief. The old man's fingers tightened around the neck of the violin. "You," he whispered, his tone a mix of recognition and unease. Hiraba noticed the change instantly. "You know each other?" she asked gently. The black-coated man ignored her question and kept his gaze on the musician. "After everything that happened, I thought you would have left this place." The old man's voice was tense. "This is my place. This is where she learned." "She," the man repeated, his tone softening just slightly. "Mira." He took a deep breath and looked away for a moment, as if the name itself carried too much weight. The young boy with the broken flute looked between them, confused. "Sir, do you know about his daughter?" The stranger's jaw tightened. "I knew her better than you think." He reached into his coat and pulled out a small, weathered notebook. "And I know the truth about what happened the night she never came home." A murmur rippled through the small group that had gathered again. Modi's eyes narrowed. Truth. The accident was reported in every paper. What truth? The man in the black coat met Modi's gaze for the first time. "Prime Minister, the bus crash was not just an accident, and Mira was not just another passenger." The old man's breathing grew shallow. "Don't," he said quietly, his voice shaking. "Don't bring this here." But the black-coated man didn't stop. She was carrying something important, something people were willing to kill for. The street felt colder all of a sudden. Hiraba placed a hand on the old man's shoulder, but he kept staring at the stranger, as if the past he had buried was clawing its way back to the surface. Modi understood that this was no longer a simple story of loss. This was about to become something much larger, something dangerous. And somewhere in the crowd, a pair of unseen eyes was already watching all of them, ready to make sure certain truths never came to light. The winter light had shifted, casting longer shadows across the market. People sensed the tension in the air. Conversations quieted, shopkeepers pretended to busy themselves, but their ears stayed tuned to every word. The man in the black coat looked from Modi to the old musician. 3 years ago, he began, Mira was invited to perform at a cultural festival in the city. But she was not traveling there only for music. She was carrying a sealed envelope for someone. The old man gripped the violin tighter. "Stop." The stranger ignored him. Inside that envelope were documents. Sensitive documents. The kind that can destroy powerful people if they are made public. Hiraba's eyes softened but sharpened at the same time, her expression holding compassion for the loss, but also alertness for the danger that had just been named. Modi's voice was steady. "What kind of documents?" The black-coated man paused, glancing around at the people who were now gathering closer. "Not here. Too many ears." He turned back to the musician. "But you know what I'm talking about. That's why you stayed in this market, isn't it? Waiting for someone who might know what happened to them." The old man's voice cracked. "I stayed because this is where my daughter learned to play, not because of some game of secrets." The stranger's gaze softened for the first time, and yet those secrets took her life. A wave of unease moved through the crowd. The boy with the broken flute stepped closer to the old man, as if to shield him, even though he was far too small to protect anyone. Modi noticed this and crouched down to meet the boy's eyes. "What is your name?" "Karan," the boy said softly. Modi smiled faintly. "Stay close to him, Karan. Music will protect you more than you think." Then he stood and faced the stranger again. "If you have something to say, say it. Number half-truths." The man took a deep breath. Mira's bus never crashed by accident. It was forced off the road by 2 vehicles that disappeared before the police arrived. Her body was found, but the envelope was gone. "I know this because," He hesitated, because I was the one who gave it to her. A murmur swept through the onlookers. The old man closed his eyes, his face tightening with pain. You put my daughter in danger? I didn't know it would come to that, the stranger said quickly. She agreed to deliver it, because she believed in what it stood for, truth. She said music and truth were the same. Both should be free. Hiraba took the old man's hand gently, steadying him as his shoulders shook. Who wanted the envelope? Modi asked. The black-coated man looked him directly in the eye. People in positions so high that if I said their names here, this entire market would empty in fear. And then, from somewhere deep within the crowd, a voice called out, "Then, you should stop talking before you don't get to talk at all." Everyone turned to see a man in a gray scarf and dark glasses slowly stepping forward. Unlike the black-coated stranger, his presence carried a coldness that froze the space around him, and as he approached, Modi understood the people behind Mira's death had just found them. The crowd stepped back as the man in the gray scarf moved forward, his boots striking the pavement with slow, deliberate weight. His dark glasses hid his eyes, but the stillness of his expression was more unsettling than anger. The black-coated stranger instinctively shifted to place himself between the newcomer and the old violinist. "You shouldn't be here," he said in a low voice. The man in the gray scarf gave a faint smile that didn't reach his lips. "And yet, here I am, just like you." Hiraba's grip on her son's arm tightened. She didn't know who this man was, but every instinct told her he was dangerous. Modi felt it too. The man's presence wasn't just threatening, it was confident, like someone who had already planned the next 5 moves. "You know why I'm here," the man continued, his voice carrying over the tense silence. "It's time to stop digging into things that were buried for a reason." The old musician's voice trembled. "Buried for a reason? My daughter's life was taken for those papers you speak of. That is not a reason, it's a crime." The man in the gray scarf tilted his head. "A crime? No, a correction. She was carrying something she was never meant to see, much less deliver." Karan, the boy with the broken flute, stepped forward without thinking. "She was brave," he blurted out. "She wanted to help people." The man in the gray scarf looked at him with a cold, almost amused expression. Bravery and foolishness looked the same from a coffin. Modi stepped forward then, his voice calm but firm. "Your threats mean nothing here. If you have something to say, speak it in the open, or leave." The man's smile vanished. "You think being prime minister makes you untouchable? This is bigger than politics, bigger than countries." He glanced at the black-coated stranger. "You know what's in those papers, and you know it doesn't just destroy one person, destroys an entire structure." The stranger said nothing, but his jaw tightened. The man in the gray scarf leaned closer to the old violinist. "You've survived this long because you kept your head down. Don't start looking up now." Hiraba stepped between them, her voice steady and unshaken. "You speak as if fear is wisdom, but fear has never built anything worth keeping." For a moment, the man in the gray scarf seemed almost caught off guard, but then he straightened. "I'll give you 1 day. By tomorrow, you will leave this market. You will forget about Mira's envelope, and you will never speak of it again." Without waiting for a reply, he turned and walked away, the crowd partying silently. When he was gone, the black-coated stranger let out a slow breath. "That was not a warning," he said quietly. "That was a countdown." Modi looked at the old man, at his mother, and at Karan, who was now clutching the broken flute tightly to his chest. "Then we have less than 24 hours, Modi said, "and we will use every minute to find what Mira died protecting." The market looked different that night. Most of the stalls were closed early, and the quiet felt heavier than usual. Modi, Hiraba, the old violinist, the black-coated stranger, and Karan gathered in the small back room of a tea shop, away from curious eyes. A single lantern flickered in the center of the table. The stranger placed a folded map on the wooden surface. Before Mira left for the city, She told me if anything went wrong, the envelope would be hidden where she first learned to play a complete song. She said I'd understand. The old man's eyes widened. That was not here in the market. It was in the old community hall. But that building has been locked for years. Then we unlock it, Modi said firmly. Under the cover of darkness, they made their way to the abandoned hall at the edge of the town. The door groaned as the black-coated man forced it open. Inside, dust floated in the air like fragments of memory. The old man walked to a corner where a small wooden platform stood. She stood right here, he whispered, playing her first song without a single mistake. His fingers traced the edge of the platform until they found a loose board. With careful hands, he pried it up. Beneath it was a cloth-wrapped package, untouched for years. The black-coated stranger unwrapped it slowly. Inside was a weathered brown envelope, still sealed. The old man's breath caught. This is it. But before they could speak further, footsteps echoed outside. The man in the gray scarf appeared in the doorway, flanked by two others. I warned you, he said softly. Modi stepped forward, his voice steady. And I told you fear will not decide what we do. Hiraba took the envelope from the black-coated stranger. This does not belong to you, she said to the man in the gray scarf. This belongs to the truth. For a tense moment, no one moved. Then Karin, trembling but determined, lifted his broken flute to his lips and blew a shaky note. It was small, imperfect, but it echoed in the hall. The old man's eyes filled with tears. Mira used to say, "Music can break chains," he murmured, as if the sound had broken the spell. The black-coated stranger stepped between the gray scarf man and the door. "You will not take this from them," he said, seeing they were outnumbered. In spirit, if not in force. The man in the gray scarf gave a cold look, then turned away. "You have no idea what you've started," he warned, before disappearing into the night. By morning, the envelope was in the hands of people who could protect its contents and use them to bring justice. What was inside would shake powerful circles, just as Mira had believed it could. The old violinist returned to the market, but he no longer played for an empty tin box. Every day, children gathered to learn from him, including Karin, whose broken flute was replaced with a real one. Hiraba often visited, sitting quietly and listening. Modi would stand beside her, watching the way music seemed to pull strangers together. One evening, as the sun set over the market, the old man played Mira's favorite song. This time, it didn't sound like grief, it sounded like a promise, and in that melody, her voice lived on. Weeks had passed since the envelope was delivered to safe hands, but the weight of those nights still lingered in the minds of those who lived them. The market had returned to its usual rhythm, vendors calling out, children running between stalls, but there was a new presence in the air, something unspoken yet felt by everyone. The old violinist no longer sat alone. Each morning, a small group of children waited for him, holding whatever instruments they had, some old, some broken, some borrowed. Among them was Karin, now carrying a simple but well-made wooden flute. His fingers had grown quicker, his notes surer. Hiraba visited often, carrying small parcels of food for the children. She never asked for a song, but somehow, the old man always played one when she came. He would watch her, close her eyes, as if each note painted pictures only she could see. One day, as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the market, Modi arrived quietly. No security detail, no speeches, just him, walking between stalls until he reached the corner, where the music lived. The old man looked up from tuning his violin. "You've come on a special day," he said. "What is today?" Modi asked. "Today," the old man replied, "is the day Mira would have turned 25. The children fell silent. Karin clutched his flute tightly. Hiraba, standing beside her son, reached into her bag and pulled out the same shawl she had once given the old man. She draped it over his shoulders again. as if the act was part of the music itself. "Play her song," she said softly, and he did. But this time, it was not just the violin. One by one, the children joined in flutes, drums, even a rusted harmonium someone had brought from home. Their notes wove together in imperfect harmony, yet there was something in it that felt whole, unbroken. People stopped to listen. Shopkeepers stepped outside, customers paused mid-purchase, and soon, the entire market gathered again, just as they had on that winter morning. Modi stood still, watching the way strangers leaned closer to one another, how eyes softened, how even the tired and weary seemed lighter in that moment. When the last note faded, there was a silence, deep and full, before the market erupted in applause. The old man bowed his head. "She always said music can break chains," he murmured. Maybe she was right. Maybe it can also build bridges. Hiraba smiled faintly. Bridges that will outlast fear. As night settled over the town, the lanterns in the market flickered to life, their warm glow reflecting in the eyes of those who had gathered. Somewhere far away, powerful people still whispered about the envelope and its consequences. But here in this small corner of the world, something stronger than fear had taken root, and as the old violinist played one final note for the evening, it was clear that Mira's song had not ended. It had only just begun, carried forward by every heart it had touched.